My name is Sean Prober, and I'm joined with Marley Morrow.
Welcome to Abnormal Psych. And we have 10 awesome topics to go over today. First on our list is Whoopi Goldberg and her comments on The View. We're also going to be talking about Bezos. He's going viral again. We've had also a couple different incidents of celebrities committing suicide. So we're going to talk about COVID and mental health and suicide in general.
As reported by the BBC, prominent scientists are discussing the likelihood of alien species in the universe. A bit about sexuality and celebrity and what exactly is going on there. Jump into a bit about the Metaverse and sexual assault, the expectations in the Metaverse community. Spirit asking one of their travelers to take off a Let's Go Brandon mask, a new Hillsong controversy, and maybe a resolution to the Joe Rogan COVID drama. First off, Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, so did you read the article about Whoopi, or do you want me to
Yeah, I saw bits and pieces, but what
Okay, so the whole issue with the Whoopi comment was they were talking about the Holocaust, and the Holocaust has been brought up a lot recently. I think they banned that Holocaust book, Mouse.
Yeah, I remember that. Even I actually do remember that from the libraries at school, and it's funny to think nowadays that you had a little swastika.
I know
being sold to children,
but at the same time, not letting kids see things doesn't make them go away, and eventually those kids are gonna grow up and they're gonna have to know about things that happened.
Yeah,
you can't protect.
Not from Whoopi though.
Yeah, but the whole thing with Whoopi is that she was saying in the Holocaust it wasn't a race issue because it was two groups of white people, saying the Jews because they were lighter skinned, and then obviously the Germans, the Nazis were, light skinned as well.
Even in American categorizations, I could be wrong, but I believe that Jews were considered colored in America for a while. So I know that we definitely didn't have that standard. I think the line has blurred over the years, and Jews have become a lot more integrated into society. And of course, there are a lot of events that have been happening in the news lately that could maybe make you second guess that assumption. But it seems generally that the Jewish Americans have integrated well, so it's maybe hard for us to look at this point from this perspective of 2022.
Yeah, I would say there's, definitely ways of looking at lots of groups of, Europeans and Middle Eastern people and saying grouping them together. People do that with Asians and Latins all the time. But the whole thing with the Nazis and the Holocaust was that they were saying that the Jews were beneath them, or their whole...
a lesser race.
Exactly. So from the perspective of the situation, they were being treated as a different race. And so I think, she obviously has talked about it and said that she was wrong. And, I think even though maybe she shouldn't have said something like that, it's good that she heard the criticism and changed her viewpoint, and maybe she learned something that day.
It would be nice in our society if somebody did or said something wrong, if they could apologize and their life wasn't over. So yeah. I support that. I mean, we all liked Ghost, so she's built up some goodwill in my mind, although I've disagreed with a few things on The View, but for the most part, she doesn't seem terrible.
No, and I think the only way to learn sometimes is to make mistakes and know that maybe you had a wrong opinion. I mean, even with science, people are wrong, and we learn all the things that they did believe that were wrong, like about the earth or the solar system or anything.
Yeah, you judge people by kind of the best available information at the time, and in a lot of ways, science is mistake after mistake until you eventually find the correct way. I think Galileo was pretty ignorant about a lot, and what's the thought on it? Newton, they said, was a genuine believer in fairies.
You know, I also like to believe that fairies existed.
I could support it. I don't think I'll fight that one. But now the next story that we have here is, of course, Jeffrey Bezos. And the controversy here was in a video, he slapped a woman's behind.
So this is his girlfriend, and Jeffrey Bezos has been getting a lot of love on social media. You know, he has his own song, which was super popular on TikTok. Bezos. Yeah, exactly. So it's just another viral moment for Bezos, and he's just living his best life.
It's got to be very fun to, at least from his appearance when this journey all started. He didn't look like somebody who was having the greatest time.
No.
You know, not somebody who would go into a bar and stop the room. But this new jacked...
Very average.
This new jacked, shaved head, Bezos, now single. He's definitely...
Is he single? Oh, I mean, I guess, yeah, he did get divorced.
Yeah. He created the wealthiest woman in the world, I believe.
Yeah, and she did donate a big chunk of that, so...
Yeah.
Props to her for that. But I think the whole love affair with Jeffrey Bezos is that whole evolution of him. So he was this very average, not attractive man. Sorry, Bezos. And he worked in his garage and built this empire that has pretty much taken over the world. I mean, the Amazon, AWS, people use that. The government uses that for their websites and emails and stuff.
Yeah, they have a $15 billion contract now. I believe it's getting contested in court by Microsoft, but they're set to do all the servers for
they're
the
taking over.
U.S. government.
They're going to space. They're pretty much everybody buys something on Amazon.
Every day I come home and there's 4 packages.
Amazon TV, Amazon Prime. So I feel like an American, rags to riches. Obviously, he's a white man, so not everybody can,
give him credit.
Well, not even that, but identify with him maybe. But I think people like that whole thought that if you work hard, you can get lucky and you can take over the world him and Musk have done. And, he always looks happy. Whenever I see a picture of Bezos, he always looks like he's enjoying himself.
He does. To me, he wears the crown a little bit lighter than Elon. Mm-hmm. Elon looks like he has a tough day, and he's the first to tell you how many hours he works and goes through. Now, a lot of the success with Amazon, at least recently, has been about most of the country being locked down for that year.
Yeah.
And when that occurred, without your mom and pop and local stores being able to be open, everybody really relied on Amazon. And in a lot of ways, you have to give him credit for being there.
And opening up the world to even small rural communities. I lived in a really small town in Ohio, and I remember when Amazon first came out, when it was mostly books. Yeah. And then it started getting other stuff. My mom would start buying weird clothes and stuff from Amazon. It has just grown so much. Like, I don't think anybody would have expected it 10 years ago to become what it is. But it's hurt, some communities. But I think it's also, done a lot of good in other ways.
It fits a need that's obviously in demand. Now, during COVID, I think a lot of people have avoided this topic because you get kind of connected to the anti-mask movement and the anti-lockdown and the anti-vaccine movement when you talk about some of the negative effects of the pandemic. But in this case, and we're seeing the data come in now, there's been a lot of people who have not done well in the pandemic mentally. And suicide is at a huge hike right now.
Yeah, there's been even a couple stories recently, like a former Miss America, I believe, like a couple days ago, committed suicide, jumped off of a building in New York, because now they're telling us that she was worried about aging and running out of time. So I think, for somebody who did turn 30 during the pandemic, it did kind of like bum me out. Like, there was a time where I was like, okay, well, my youth is over, I'm in lockdown, and even now I still feel it, where it's like, are we ever going to go back to normal? Like, am I ever going to be able to like go on vacation and not feel bad about it? Or, walk around a store and not feel like I should wear a mask and get all sweaty underneath of it? Because, I'm trying to do the right thing, but I don't even know what the right thing is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are at that point now where they're willing to put themselves in a little more risk, or willing to take the gamble a bit more when you start to think about the lost time. Imagine a high school senior losing that year. Mm-hmm. Or imagine losing a freshman year in college. These are moments that people keep with them their entire lives. And we're seeing a generation just without any of this. And it's hard to imagine what the psychological effects are going to be long term. They're certainly not looking good in the moment.
Yeah, I think loneliness is a real issue. And this is something we were seeing even before the pandemic, where we were isolating ourselves. And now with COVID, it's gotten 100 times worse, where we're a home alone most of the time. Like, unless somebody lives with us, we're not really going out and socializing anymore.
In terms of being alone, perhaps the world isn't alone in our universe.
Yeah. There's a large amount of people who do believe that, and I like to dabble in it. I think there was a story recently. A scientist has claimed on a BBC podcast that the likelihood there's another planet out there with a human-like species is almost, 100% likely. And in this article, an evolutionary paleobiologist at the University of Cambridge told the BBC's Science Focus magazine that he has reasonable confidence that human-like evolution has occurred in other parts of the universe.
It makes sense when you look out there and there's just an infinite number of suns, an infinite number of planets and moons. You'd have to imagine something could scrape together and be there. Now, do you think that, are you a believer that these people or these creatures have never found us, or do you subscribe to the idea that they found us and aren't interested?
I like to be open to both. Part of me is like, we've only seen like 20% of the ocean, right? Like mapped out 20% of the ocean bed or something like that. How do we know that there's not some kind of alien community in the ocean? How do we know like that they didn't find a way to use like black holes to travel through space? So I'm open to the idea that they have somehow interacted with us. I mean, you see it in ancient Egypt. You see it in a lot of like ancient civilizations, like drawings of some kind of alien encounters. It makes sense when you see humans versus other animal species that humans have something going on. You know, like I feel like as a member of Earth that we're all like connected to living things, but there's obviously something different with humans to allow us to just completely take over and have the internet and have TVs and all this technology.
There was that massive increase in their brain. You remember at a certain point that evolutionary scientists can't really explain what led to this need for this kind of increase.
It would make sense that maybe a more advanced society came and visited us.
I like the idea that they're in the ocean.
Yeah. I don't know why, but I've always liked this idea. And they talk about like octopus are aliens.
Yeah, that there's almost they're very, very different than other creatures in terms of their DNA. That almost everything, you know, and fish and humans are connected a lot closer than this strange octopus. I've actually stopped eating.
Yeah, I won't eat it either.
Them after learning a bit more about them, after seeing them unscrew, bottles and solve really complex tasks. I can't bring myself to bite in those little heads anymore. I'm officially a fan of them. No cow has done that for me yet, but
cows are pretty cute, though.
They are. I spent a lot of my childhood vacations going. They do.
I'm not a big fan of octopus, like the chewiness, anyways.
And it's a little bit gross looking.
Yeah, they always leave the like suction cups. I've never understood why they leave that on there.
See, squid I'll do anytime.
I don't like squid either. They freak me out.
Yeah. There have been arguments that there are some vegetables or some plants that are actually smarter than
a squid.
An oyster.
Oh, yeah.
Or mollusk.
Oysters, in my opinion, are like some kind of plant, like, I don't know, like a Venus flytrap. Or...
They're right in the middle there between them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and a lot of like shrimp and crabs, they're kind of like bugs to me. So I don't feel bad eating them. I only feel bad if it like has like some kind of environmental, like it's bad for the environment.
Would you eat a dolphin?
No.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to cut back on eating meat in general.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you kind of think about it more and more each year.
Yeah.
And I feel a little bit less right about it all the time.
And I'm not like against people eating meat in general as much as I'm against like the way we do it now with like the factory farms and the way that animals are treated and the effects on the planet. So whatever.
Yeah, it does seem to not be good for anything.
Yeah.
No, there have been quite a few examples of this throughout history, and that's how do I put this? A high likelihood that rock stars, men or women, end up being more open about homosexuality than the general public. It's almost like if you're a rock star, you're given this pass that most people aren't given, that you're able to be a little bit more publicly experimental than the average guy. I think if Paul Rudd came out and started having gay affairs, it would be a very big, weird issue that people would bring up. But if you sing, it's somewhat okay. Who just...
Okay, this isn't a singer, but I know from history that... Don't they say, like, Mick Jagger? Like, who are the rockers?
Yeah, David Bowie. There were apparently David Bowie and Lou Reed had a bit of a relationship where they were sexual.
Yeah,
and Mick Jagger.
Exactly. On the sexual
Who would have
part,
thought?
Hugh Hefner, there's been a couple stories about Hugh Hefner having a gay love affair with his doctor. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. Obviously, Hugh Hefner can't defend himself. But just from a psychological standpoint, if you have sex with all these women and women are just throwing themselves at you, if you're a rocker, if you're I guess an actor would also kind of fit in that category, but we do hold them to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Hugh Hefner, obviously being a Playboy, founder, all these women coming to him, you don't know what their intentions are or whatnot. Maybe once you have that kind of experience, it's easier to relate to a same-sex partner. Maybe, you've had sex with so many women that the next thing to try is, being with men.
You're not worried after sleeping with 1,000 women that somebody's going to call you gay.
Yeah. Or maybe it's just that whole atmosphere of doing drugs and being deviant, in those industries where people are already okay, you're a rocker, you're a deviant person. Hugh Hefner, obviously everybody was oh yeah, he's having sex with all these people. Once you're already doing that, it's what's the next thing? Just with a murder, maybe you start killing animals and then you have to keep doing more and more and more to get that feeling that you're being deviant, that you're being hard rock, that you're, you get that adrenaline rush from people being wow.
Yeah, it was always rumored that that he had a VIP a group of guys, and that they would kind of use the place like a harem. But I think less and less as the years went by, but as a younger man, I believe that they would have more group sex with men and women, kind of going in that vibe of deviancy. You can imagine, I believe it started in the 70s, late 60s and 70s. You can imagine how wild it must have been to hear that somebody would even be appearing topless in a mainstream kind of publication.
And maybe even not from a deviant standpoint, if you are open. I think a lot of people have these beliefs, but it's because of their religion or because of their culture that they're told not to do these things. But from an animal standpoint, if you just let yourself be your true self, maybe a lot of people are a lot more fluid. And once you break those boundaries, maybe you can, be more experimental, and it just comes naturally.
Yeah, and you do see that. The average guy who is at a factory is going to feel different than if you had millions of dollars in the bank. People relied on you with or without your sexual orientation. You weren't worried about criticism from your peers. How many people would be bisexual, or perhaps even the complete opposite, and how many heterosexual people would be homosexual?
Or maybe people would just be both, because being heterosexual has its purpose in that
somebody has to do it.
You have to create more of your species, but also we've seen in almost every species that usually people stay with their same sex. They have the group of men that have a pact together, and then the women have their times together. So I think it's very natural if you're a sexual being to just have sex with different people. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So everything has its purpose. You have your friends that are same sex for a purpose, and you have friends that are different sex for a purpose. Or relationships, or family members of different sexes. Everything has its purpose.
Certainly support that.
But It's just interesting to think, like, if we didn't have all these, like, norms, like, what would humans do? Like, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. It's amazing how somehow we got to a point where everybody's completely covered up and, like, sitting in lines in a room and just working these kind of cubicle positions. It's weird how much order we actually got out of the chaos that is a human mind.
Yeah.
That it got to this point, and it is so odd that you have these standards and people are choosing completely different lives just based on what other people are going to think or how they're going to be treated.
Because we're social animals.
Yeah.
It's important to us. Going back to the COVID, that's why it's been having such a negative impact. Psychologically, because we're meant to be together. And social media is not, fulfilling this need to, the same extent as, like, being with family and friends. And it's good to have when you can't be together. But
I think when you look at America's divide right now and how bad it is, I think a lot of that is because of social media communication. That you're not seeing the Republican or the Democrat who you work with that you also have good times with. You're only having these battles on social media where everybody's just being negative. So it's almost worse than not speaking to anybody.
yeah.
It's having a horrible interaction.
And now with, all the filters and all the trends and people wanting clicks and people trying to, like, make money off of social media, it's just gotten to a point where people can't even be themselves, and they feel like when they are being themselves that it's not enough. Like, everybody wants to live the life of a celebrity. Everybody wants to be, like, popular.
It is wild to think that a lot of people don't ever go online without wearing a filter mask. But that's like a totally normal thing now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of bizarre.
It is.
You'd almost not want to meet people in reality. And I guess when we're looking at that, that's everything with the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. Like, are we moving towards this world where
If you're
we have
better
an
looking
avatar?
in the metaverse, you might want to stay in there longer
Exactly.
than your real life.
And even if you are attractive, there's always room for improvement in everything. You could always be taller. You could always have better hair. So I think if we get into this world where we're making avatars, like, everybody's going to get sucked in.
Yeah. Yeah, the second that... To me, I think you're almost got to a point where that if there was a way to achieve some kind of sexual gratification in the metaverse,
I bet there will be.
that was comparable with the sex on the outside, that you would have the $1 trillion business, that you would have people spending
Should
most
we
of their
invent
time.
like one of those, like, machines or toys that are like
You have a hole in the
whatever.
controller.
Yeah, and then it, like, somehow is like a Bluetooth device to, like, the metaverse.
Oh, wow, and the person's action in the metaverse could be moving in the same way.
Yeah.
And maybe the feeling different
Exactly.
of a hand or mouth.
But you have to consent to it. Like, from both ends,
Yeah,
they would have to consent, before any of that would happen.
I mean, you could do a pop-up. That would be convenient.
Yeah, and I'm saying this because there's been a lot of stories about sexual assault in the metaverse. You want to get into that?
Yeah, so one woman who was, seemed like a sweet woman who was about 42 in England had put on the controller, that put on the mask. She didn't have the sexual apparatus that we're
going to invent
there. But so she has that. Within the first minute or so of being in the metaverse, 3 metaverse characters engage with her and start. I'm not familiar with the gameplay, but somehow feeling her up and huddling around. And I think their microphones are on, so she's hearing all of the things that they're saying.
Probably disturbing things.
Probably very disturbing. She ended up having to like tear the headphones off. But if somebody were a victim of sexual assault, you can imagine, and for anybody, that this would be very triggering.
Yeah, and this seems like a very unhealthy trend with like some men where they're, mistreating women and assaulting women in virtual reality or just in games in general. I mean, if you play a lot of video games,
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, you can abuse women, and I think that's very common.
Yeah, it was. They had the function of prostitutes in Grand Theft Auto very early on in the series.
Yeah,
And I remember being 15 or 16 and seeing those kind of things. But yeah, you do always have this issue. So just like reality, I think the metaverse people are going to have to deal with how are they going to create a safe environment for their people. Obviously, they're going to rely on a lot of young people even to get this program. If you were a parent, thinking that they were going to be roaming hordes of sexual deviants with microphones.
You don't want your kids to be exposed to that. And I think this opens up the question of like, why does this keep happening? And we see like the statistics for sexual assault that like 1 in 4 women in general, and I think it's like maybe 1 in 3 for minority women, that we see these really high rates of sexual assault. And then when you watch what people do when they're anonymous, it makes sense why this is happening. And is it porn? Is it just something that we need to evolve out of?
That was an interesting conversation that Billie Eilish started, where she kind of talked about starting to watch pornography very young and kind of the damaging effects that had on her, especially when she's first started becoming sexually active, and to think that those were the expectations. Now, a lot of people have been saying this for a lot of years, but the idea that, a young, up and coming, well, I guess already there, celebrity would go out and say that made it a little bit more acceptable to discuss. And like anything, when it's so accessible to these children, there does have to be a question of how could we stop this from being so easy when everybody has their cell phone from the age of 12.
You can look up anything you want to. I think it's very dangerous that at a young age, like when boys are first like becoming sexual, that they have, and women too, because women are also sexual, but I think men have a little bit more of an issue with it, and they become like addicted. I know a couple of people who got addicted to porn early on, and just like we were talking about earlier, the more porn you watch, like sometimes it just starts getting like more and more intense, and having that
intense meaning more aggressive towards women often.
Yeah, usually, or like disrespectful in some way. That
something that an average person isn't going to enjoy.
Yeah, and these things like affect your brain, and when it's still developing, you're not fully developed till 25. The way it's wired changes, and even after 25, if you do anything for a long time, it starts to change the structure of your brain and the connections.
Neuroplasticity.
So it's dangerous. It's just like if, like, I have an issue with eating. If I had cookies around me at all time, that would not be good.
Yeah.
Or like a drink around, like a beer.
Yeah, that's
constantly.
If you have your phone, it's
I had an unlimited beer in my back pocket.
Yeah, that's the thing that these people's neuroactivity is being heavily influenced by this porn addiction. That they're getting all these. I think you have neurotransmitters that come out when somebody's staring at you. To feel better. And there's a reason why in pornography it's so common that the woman's staring at the camera. to actually get this, and people are genuinely addicted to getting these chemicals. So who knows what's going to happen as the world progresses. But now we're seeing the first generation that really had this ability to watch from the time they were 10 years old. So watch out for those Gen Zers.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about cannibalism, and I saw this meme this morning, and it said, like, that we need to teach boys that raping and, like, sexual assault is just as bad as cannibalism. You know, we talked about cannibalism, and it was very common around the world, and now, you know, the thought of it is so appalling, and a lot of people, like, don't, like, that's something that's very scary to them and very disturbing. So we need to have this, like, conversation about sexuality. And I know a lot of people, especially now with all, like, the banning of knowledge about sexual orientation or race or anything that people think is offensive, we need to have more conversations about it. And maybe, you know, we can limit the curse words, or, you know, try to ease people into it. But these conversations need to be had, because we're living in a society where we see all these negative effects.
So Spirit is in a bit of trouble because there's a video where there's this kid and he's wearing quite an interesting mask. And it's lit up. That's what's kind of weird about it. I didn't even know that this technology existed. But it's lit up and it says, "Let's go Brandon FJB." So you're saying he didn't want anybody to get confused, and if they didn't know about the "Let's go Brandon," you got to get the "fuck Joe Biden" part in there. But he ended up actually getting told by the woman, the flight stewardess, that he had to cover it up with one of their blue masks. So they provided him this kind of disposable mask and asked him to cover it up because it was could be offensive to other flyers. So, well, I mean, it makes sense that in a private place you don't want something with this.
We just had the one court case with the baker, you know, like, where private companies can choose to, like, not do what they don't want to do.
Yeah. So if that's their policy, I'd be interested if somebody had something negative of Trump, whether or not they would have had an issue. It's interesting because you wouldn't want to force an airline to do things, you know, but when it comes down to having a critical opinion on the president, it seems weird in America to not have to get rid of it, especially since they didn't have any overt curses on it. If it was something that they actually had fuck on, I would think I could understand.
But why are curse words such a big deal? You know,
if a child saw that.
Like, I don't get the whole thing with curse words. And the same people who are so for freedom of speech are always the people who are like, oh no, just because a curse word in it, I don't want my kid to see it. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand that. I do understand from if it was a government company that you wouldn't want them to say you can't criticize the president, because that is something that we see in, like, dictatorships and in governments that don't have freedom. But if you have your own company, I mean, I don't 100% agree with this, but that's what the courts have, you know, proven and supported, that if you feel offended by something and you have a company, you don't have to deal with it. You can tell that person to go away.
Which is, I think, the right way of going. I mean, if the government were dictating all these things, you would actually have have some reason for concern.
I don't know if I 100%, agree with it, because from the standpoint of Spirit is a cheaper airlines, and if they're not allowed, to be themselves or whatever on this airline, then they have to choose a different airline that's maybe more expensive. So just like if one company doesn't want to work with gay people, that it might be hard for that gay person to go find somewhere else to get a good from. I don't think that's a positive way of society evolving. But at the same time, if it's a company, I guess they have their rights.
Yeah, but in terms of the cakes, I guess that was their argument, right? That they were able to get other cakes easily enough.
But what if we had a situation in some rural community where all the people decided that they didn't want to serve gay people, and then gay people had to make their own cakes?
Luckily, when I watched the Great British Baking Show, it seems like a lot of the gay guys are.
If that were to happen, though, you would think that somebody would step up and be like, there's a market to make cakes for gays.
Absolutely.
And they would. And maybe, if somebody doesn't like you to that extent, it's better to not.
Maybe Delta is going to become really MAGA. Make flying great again. You'd end up, at the end of the day, in business, it's stupid to be political to some extent. I think we see it in publishing, that you're always going to be missing out on some people if you're political.
It's what matters more, that opinion or money?
Yeah. When something is just dripping with bias, even if you agree with it, it starts to put up those red flags of should I trust this? Because it doesn't seem like they're coming at this in a fair way. Now, did you hear anything about the Hillsong preacher?
Yeah, wasn't it the founder of Hillsong stepped down because he's being charged with concealing knowledge of child abuse, child sexual abuse. And I think it was his father, if I'm not mistaken.
Why do you think that you hear so many scandals like this when we're talking about religious groups? The people that you'd expect to trust the most.
Well, you also hear a lot about teachers doing it.
It's opportunity.
Maybe it's a mix of it's the most disturbing when we hear it because we want to trust those people. And then also, those people have the most access to children. So if you're a sexual predator, you're going to try to get into an environment where you're around children.
Now, Hillsong, they're making a lot of headlines because of how many celebrities they're able to get and just the massive amount of people that attend their events. It's kind of the celebrity version of Christianity.
Yeah, I think maybe Kanye's church is going to take over, but I know they just had...
They have Bieber, right?
They did. The pastor was friends with Justin Bieber, but I think he had some cheating scandal, and he's no longer there. So they've had a couple scandals along the way, but when anything gets big enough, there's always going to be all the skeletons are found. So
it happened down here. We have Calvary Church, and they had a radio guy you'd hear him on 2 or 3 channels every morning in most of South Florida, and they got to, like you said, you got to a certain point, and all of a sudden you found out this guy's got a couple of girlfriends on the side, and it's just too hard to take somebody serious when your job is to preach morality.
Yeah.
And you get shown to have none. It's
that Rasputin religious where you have to sin to be close to God or something.
Oh, is that?
I think that's like the sexual cult religion thing that he was a part of.
Does that have anything to do with Satanism?
It might. I'm not an expert.
We have been seeing a lot of events, I think, recently in Washington, D.C. The Satanists put their kind of statue up next to the Christmas tree, next to the menorah, kind of for equal representation of religion.
Are these people serious, or are they just trying to get a rise, is what I want to know.
I think it's always been a little tongue-in-cheek. I think that I don't think it's the genuine belief that the devil, as described in the Bible, is there. It's more of a very individualist kind of philosophy.
It's like the anti-Christianity, basically.
Yeah, that your only obligation is truly to yourself.
Yeah.
But they get their equal representation. So it's always hard for me to understand why these things get so far and so crazy that people are leaving platforms because of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan seems like such a sweet guy that he's sitting there, he's talking to his friends, he's having interesting conversations, and all of a sudden people are demanding that he's gone or leaving platforms like Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, I think Rolling Stones, like some big guys.
Yeah. In my opinion, they could maybe go about these things a little bit better. At the canceling and like going 0 to 60. He seems like from his apology, which I'm sure he's just worried about losing money and deals and stuff. But I also think he may, be open to changing things, and he just needs somebody to tell him that, you need to have other people's opinions if you're going to have these dangerous ones. And dangerous because we are in a pandemic. I'm tired of it too. I'm tired of the vaccines. I'm tired of the masks. But the reality is, like, we're still in it. And a lot of people are going around and getting sick. My grandparents run around and don't care about COVID, and they've all got it. And a couple of them really struggled with it. So it's no joke, and it is dangerous. I think you have to have some kind of responsibility.
Yeah, when you see how many people are actually reached and how many people kind of use it as a news source, it is a lot of responsibility to fall on someone. And I think that maybe he's seeing it a little bit more now and will at least give it more thought. I think when you get this much criticism, like we were joking about Neil Young, not being enough. But like when you get all these, he probably likes Neil Young to some extent. When you get all this criticism, it's gonna, if you're a decent person, you'll at least think about it a little bit more. And, maybe that will make all the difference and maybe a little bit more nuance on his part in the future. But it seemed like he came out. I was surprised by how receptive he actually was.
Well, you said he was a nice guy, and I remember when he was doing Fear Factor, and I always liked Joe Rogan, and when you were listening to it and I was hearing all these like conservative things, I was like, whoa, I didn't know he was like into that. But at first it seemed like he was more of just like wanting to talk about these crazy people, like these crazy ideas, like anybody who was like out there, he wanted to talk to them. But then I think he started to like evolve and like get this like following. And just like with what happened with Trump, like you start to like want to give people what they want. And even if you don't maybe like believe in these super conservative things, like maybe you're just a little open to it. And by having these conversations more and more and more, like you get this big conservative following. And I'm okay with people having opinions, not that that matters, but like people should be able to have opinions. But you also have to have people that are experts and not just people with crazy opinions giving people news.
Now, we've talked about this concept of kind of Trump becoming more conservative because his audience is more conservative. And it is kind of like this New York City playboy who never probably gave too much consideration about Jesus. And in a lot of ways became the voice of Christian America.
And I don't even think the Christians really believe that he is religious. They just like what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I don't even think anybody cares.
No, there was no dent in his evangelical support when you heard about Stormy Daniels or anything like that. So it seems like he's almost above reproach.
Well, I mean, there's people who go to church that have cheated and everything. So just because you go to church doesn't mean that you're perfect.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of...
I seem more tolerant of him than others.
Yeah. Well, it's more of like you pick out the flaws in people you don't like. You don't like them and you try to find reasons to support it. I see that all the time with like Obama and things like that. And it's okay to just not like somebody. Sometimes I meet somebody and I'm just like, I don't really like them, you know?
Yeah, and it's natural that you're going to have those kind of thoughts more. You're going to be a little bit more critical in your mind when you're, we always joke, like if you're on a date with somebody and it's going fantastic, they could probably do a number of bad habits that would be a pet peeve of yours eventually.
Yeah.
Or if somebody you dislike were to do the same thing, you can maybe excuse loud chewing a bit more from somebody who you're enraptured with.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, so those were our top stories today. We hope you join us again. Take care, folks.